Greetings. I would like to welcome you to our daily weekday Mass, held here at the National Shrine of St. Therese on the Carmelite campus in Darien, Illinois. The Carmelites cherish praying and celebrating with you. This shrine is the blessing of a generous gift from the Margie and Robert Peterson Foundation.
Good evening. My name is Father Tom Schrader. I'm the director of the Society of Little Flower, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. You know, one of the wonderful things about this evening is that it's a gathering. As we know, I promised that there would be 100 Carmelites here, so I'm hoping that promise holds true. And one of the things that we know is that this shrine is relatively new. It was dedicated in 2018, October 1st, the feast day of Therese. And we also know that it was a wonderful, generous gift of Margie and Robert Peterson. And one of the things that we might know is that Margie had a wonderful devotion to St. Therese. And she had a wonderful relationship with the Society of Little Flower as well. And she would often order our novena prayer cards to pass out at her Hollywood parties, because her husband and her were very active in the entertainment industry and in the publishing industry in Los Angeles. And they were very well known. And so they kind of lived a different life than we live. And they were able to obviously give a gift such as this to us that we can enjoy it, but it's really a gift to Therese, a gift to who she is, who she meant to them personally in their lives, and how she brought them through difficulties and challenges and joys that they faced. Now, one of the things that we might know is that the fortune, in a sense, came from about 500 different magazines. And I don't know if you remember the days when they used to go into a newsstand and there would be hundreds of magazines with all different topics, from knitting to hot rods. Well, they were involved in many of those magazines. And one of the things that we know is that their passion was hot rods. Their passion was Motor Trend magazine, and they really loved cars. That was one of the things that they had a passion for. And, you know, one of the things that they also funded, and if you haven't been there, it's incredible, is the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. And there, just for those of you that are thinking about Laudato Si tonight, they're having a very special show of over 150 different electric cars. So it's something that is from the very beginning, the earliest electric cars up through some of our current models. So it's really something exciting. And, you know, one of the other things that, I don't know how many of you remember this. There might be a few that served at Crespi that might remember this. Crespi's our high school in Los Angeles. There was a restaurant on Sunset Boulevard known as Scandia, and it was one of the top restaurants in Los Angeles. And it was the place that Margie would often entertain. She ran it, essentially. It was her little serendipity project. And she did that for many years. And it was a beautiful place. And it was one of the top places in Los Angeles. But she also had another side to her, because she loved Therese in such a way that I'm going to tell you a little story. And you kind of have to imagine this. I love New York City, so I can imagine this. There's a restaurant no longer there in New York City called the Four Seasons. It was in the Seagram's building. And it was the place to lunch. It was the originator of the power lunch. And Margie would pray to St. Therese. She would visit St. Patrick's Cathedral just down the street from the Seagram's building, and she would then go for lunch. And the waiter, one day, when she was praying for a special intention, brought her a red rose. And Gigi Carlton, who was their assistant, shared this story with us. So you kind of have to imagine kind of like the seat of power in New York, totally elegant place, and what was most important was the red rose, a sign from Therese. And so as we gather here tonight, let us remember that we are here because each one of us have been touched by St. Therese. Each one of us has a special place for the little flower in our hearts. And let us pray that tonight we see a little bit more deeply into how the little flower continues to enlighten our world. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm here to give a little bit of housekeeping. First, these wonderful devices, please turn them off if you can, or silence them. For my Spanish brothers, apague los teléfonos. And there is a free will offering a basket at the back of the shrine as you leave if you wish to donate for this performance. My name is Father Christopher Kulig. I'm a spiritual director at the Canadian National Shrine of St. Therese at the Monastery of Mount Carmel in Niagara Falls, Ontario. It was Mary Kischuck who contacted us some 4 years ago to put on a one-woman play of St. Edith Stein as part of her MDiv project at the University of Toronto. It was scheduled for May 2020. Yeah, so we remember not too long ago that, like many other things, went on to cyberspace and YouTube, but we saw her performance and thought she would do a wonderful job for St. Therese. Mary's background, as you'll read in the program, is in theology. The theater portion actually comes from her father, who was a theater teacher. So I give you, without further ado, Little Therese.
Do you remember the first time you saw the ocean? I will never forget the first time I saw it. I was 5 years old. I couldn't take my eyes off its majesty, the roaring waves. I have always loved wide open spaces, and running through a field full of flowers was my favorite thing to do. The sight of nature leaves profound and poetic impressions on me. When I traveled to the mountains in Switzerland, whose summits were lost in the clouds, I almost lost my breath. I seemed so little in the presence of these gigantic mountains. I really am a country girl at heart. When I went to Paris, I could not get over all that I was seeing. Paris has so many beautiful things. But I find that my Lisieux is still more beautiful. It contains my treasures. Before moving here to Lisieux, my family and I lived in Aronson, where I was born in 1873. I was only 3 months old when I was taken to a home of a wet nurse. Her name was Rosalie, and I lived with her for a year. My mother did everything she could to breastfeed me, but she was unable to make me drink. I had had intestinal trouble at the time, and my condition was getting worse and worse. Thankfully, I improved once I was with Rosalie. During that year, Rosalie would take me to see my mother while she was working as a lace maker. I might have made my mother sad because I didn't want to be held by her. I preferred to be held by country women like Rosalie. But when I returned to live with my family again, Mama said that it was impossible for me to leave her side. I am the youngest of 9 children. 4 of my siblings died when they were really small. I remember having a happy childhood with my parents and my sisters. But one day, we found out that Mama was going to die. The cancerous tumor that had developed on her breast had no hope for a cure. I can still remember Mama's face with tears in her eyes. I am madly in love with my children. I was born to have them. Frequently, I think of mothers who have the joy of nursing their children. And I had to see mine die, one after the other. There is not a moment of the day when I am not thinking of them, especially Eden. She was 5 when she died. And now I am the one who is dying. My children, I won't be able to hug you or kiss you anymore. And I won't be able to join you on our Sunday walks. I who wanted to make you so happy. I hardly sleep at night when I think of the future. But when I am no longer here, I am sure that my eldest, Marie, will be very good at managing the household and taking care of her little sisters. Pauline and Leonie will help as well. As for my 2 youngest, Céline and Therese, I'm certain that they will be good. They have their arguments from time to time, but they are inseparable. You could not find 2 children who love each other better. And my husband, Louis. It is incredible how he sacrifices so much for our family. How I love you all. When my mother died, I was 4.5 years old. At her funeral, I don't recall having cried very much. Neither did I speak to anyone about the feelings I experienced. I looked and listened in silence. On that day, my sister Céline threw her arms around my sister Marie and said, "Marie, you will be my mama." I was so used to following Céline's example that I turned to my sister Pauline and said, "For me, Pauline will be my mama." It was after my mother's death that my father decided to move our family to Lisieux to be close to my uncle and aunt. My father's very affectionate heart seemed to be enriched now with a truly maternal love. I was happy to move to Lisieux, to my beautiful home and garden. But I must admit that my happy disposition completely changed after Mama's death. I used to be so full of life, but I became timid and retiring, sensitive to an excessive degree. One look was enough to reduce me to tears. And the only way I was content was to be left alone completely. I could not bear the company of strangers and found my joy only within the intimacy of the family. When I started to attend school, I was doing well with my studies, but one of the girls began to bully me. And because I was so timid and sensitive, I didn't know how to defend myself. And I would just cry without saying a word. When I was 9, I experienced a new anguish when I found out that my sister Pauline will be leaving to become a Carmelite nun. It was as though I was losing my mother all over again. Pauline was my ideal. I wanted to be like her. She knew all the inner recesses of my little soul. When I heard that Pauline was leaving, it was as if a sword were buried in my heart. In one instant, I understood what life was. Nothing but a continual suffering and separation. In the last few weeks that Pauline was still with us, Celine and I bought her cake and candy every day. Pauline took the time to console me, and she explained all about the life of Carmel to me, and it seemed so beautiful. What attracted me about Carmel was that it was a hidden life. Later, when I was thinking over everything she said, I felt that God was also calling me to Carmel. And I felt this with so much force that there wasn't the least doubt in my heart. I wanted to go to Carmel, not for Pauline, but for Jesus. This calling that I received did come true when I eventually entered the Carmelite monastery at age 15. Looking back at my childhood, I can see how far I was from becoming who I am today. After Pauline's entrance into Carmel, I turned to my sister Marie, who guided and cared for me. I used to sit on her lap and listen eagerly to everything she said to me. It was Marie who supported me during the horrible time when I had scruples for a year and a half. I would worry and feel bad about everything. All my most simple thoughts and actions became the cause of trouble for me, and I had relief only when I told them to Marie. As soon as I laid down my burden, I experienced peace for an instant, but this peace passed away like a lightning flash, and soon my agony began again. If I happened to cause anyone I loved some little trouble, even unwittingly, instead of forgetting about it and not crying, I cried. And when I began to cheer up, I'd begin to cry again for having cried. When my sister Serine completed her studies and no longer attended school with me, I soon became sick, and I just couldn't go to school by myself. I stopped going to school when I was 13. I continued my education with a tutor, but I was still very much struggling with my scruples. It was during this time when I learned that Marie was going to leave my family, for she too felt a calling to become a Carmelite nun. At this point, I felt as though I could take no pleasure out of earth's attractions anymore. I really was quite unable to change the way I was. I was so weak. I didn't know what to do with myself. The only way I could be saved was if someone were to lift me out of the state that I was in. We are now living in an age of inventions, and we no longer have to take the trouble of climbing stairs, for an elevator can take us right where we need to be. I do believe that the elevator that lifted me out of my helplessness was Jesus' arms. And he did this on Christmas Day. I don't know about you, but I love Christmas. We used to come home from midnight mass, and then Celine and I would go straight to the fireplace to see the presents in the shoes. This old custom gave us so much joy. I remember it as though it were yesterday. Celine, look, a doll! Celine, the arm came off. Can we do a funeral like we did with the other dolls I broke? When I was about to turn 14, although I was older, Celine wanted to keep this Christmas custom for me, and I was so excited to see my presents when I came home from Mass. Papa, who usually loved to see us open presents, was tired from going to midnight Mass, and he felt annoyed when he saw my shoes and said, "Well, fortunately, this will be the last year." At the time, I was going upstairs to remove my hat, and Celine, knowing how sensitive I was, didn't want me to come downstairs because she could see that I had heard what Mama said, and I already had tears in my eyes. Papa's words pierced my heart. Something like this would have easily made me cry, but somehow in that moment, I was different. My heart had changed. I forced back my tears and ran down the stairs. My heart was pounding. I took my shoes and placed them in front of Papa and pulled out my presents joyfully. Papa regained his cheerfulness and he was smiling and laughing. Celine couldn't believe what she was seeing. In this little moment, I discovered the strength of my soul, which I had lost when Mama died. It was truly a moment of grace. Jesus had lifted me out of my imperfections so that I could grow up. This does not mean that I am no longer weak. In fact, after 8 years of a religious life, I am still weak and imperfect. But God has given me the grace to not be downcast at any passing thing. And since I have received this grace on Christmas, I have learned what it means to be courageous. It's starting to feel cold in here. I wanted to write a letter in this hour of free time, but I'm not feeling too well today. When I entered the Carmelite monastery, I did not have any illusions about it. I found the religious life to be exactly as I imagined it. So much peace and sacrifices. Some of the sisters thought that I was too slow when it came to doing my daily duties. And what pained me the most was not knowing how to correct my faults. I have a horror for spiders. And once I left a spider's web under the stairs, and one of the sisters called me to correct me. Sister Therese of the Child Jesus. Sister Therese, come, look over here. Look. It is obvious that these stairs were swept by a child of 15. You must clean everywhere properly, Sister Therese. Now, go and take that cobweb away, and be more careful in the future. Another day, I was in the sacristy when I heard a movement in the room next to me. Sisters, I think there may be a thief. Quickly, let's go and see. I will take this broom. You can take these sticks here. Oh, sister, you have a fork. All right. Could someone get a shovel? Oh, thank you, sister. We must go. Huh? Oh, sisters, I'm so sorry. I thought for sure there was a thief. Well, Sister Therese, we haven't had this much excitement during recreation in quite some time. Come along, sisters. Let us be thankful we didn't have to use our arms of defense. One of the sisters who I truly admired was Mother Geneviève of St. Teresa. She was the foundress of our monastery here in Lisieux, and she died 5 years ago when I was 18. I had a custom of visiting her during her illness, and one day she looked at me and said, "Remember, my child, our God is a God of peace." These words meant so much to me because on that particular day, I was struggling to the point where I no longer knew whether God loved me. What Mother Geneviève said was such a consolation to me. When I saw her again the next week, I asked her if she had any more insights that she could share, and she told me honestly that she had none at all. Because of this, I admired her even more. It is this type of sanctity that seems the truest and the most holy to me. It is the kind of holiness that I desire for myself, since in it, one meets with no deceptions. I love simplicity. I do not like pretense. There have been many sufferings over the course of my religious life. I was happy to be close to Pauline again, but there were times when I wasn't able to talk to her the way I used to. And at one point, I felt as though she no longer knew me. I didn't come to Carmel to live with my sisters, but to answer Jesus' call. But following Jesus did not take away the love I have for my sisters. When the human heart gives itself to God, it loses nothing of its innate tenderness. In fact, this tenderness grows when it becomes more pure and more divine. About a year after I entered Carmel, my father was hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. In the past, he had suffered from attacks of paralysis, and he began to have hallucinations that were violent at times. Sadly, the paralysis settled in his brain, and it increasingly became difficult for him to move and express himself. Serine and Leonie moved close to the hospital to be near Papa. In the end, Papa was at the hospital for 3 years. I still have a letter that Celine sent me from that time. My dear Therese, how should I express what is happening in my soul? Sunday is sometimes sad. I feel emptiness everywhere. Yesterday evening, I believe my heart was about to break. Papa appears so old to me now, so worn out. My heart is torn. I imagine that he will die soon. I believe I would die myself of sadness. I am always seeing him in his hour of agony, and my soul is so heavy that I can no longer breathe. I am going to wear myself out for him. I try to make him happy. I am doing the best I can. Dear little sister, it's true that all passes, but all is so long. Thankfully, Sister Costar takes care of Papa as though he were her father. Each day, she reminds him that we are here. Papa thinks very often of us, and sometimes he cries when speaking about us. Serine, your Therese understands your whole soul. I understand the sadness of Sunday, especially since we have so many memories of Sunday evenings where we would sit on Papa's knees and listen to him sing. There is nothing so painful as seeing someone whom we love suffer. You were so good to him, Serine, even after he came out of the hospital and stayed with you for 2 years before he died. After you brought Papa here to see us for the last time, we couldn't stop crying. Life is burdensome. Life is painful for us. When Serine used to visit me during the time when she was taking care of Papa, I would leave the visit with a heavy heart because I wasn't able to console her and say everything I wanted to say to her. I begged God to supply for my weakness. Whenever I had a thought or was sorry for having forgotten to tell her something, I would ask God to let her know and understand what I was thinking about. And in the next visit, she'd speak to me exactly about the thing I had asked God to let her know. Since that time, whenever I involuntarily caused anyone any trouble, I would beg God to repair it. And then I no longer tormented myself with the matter. Over the years, I have come to learn the mysterious depths of charity. Jesus didn't point out everything to me all at once. Rather, he has given me his light little by little. I understood the meaning of charity before, but in an imperfect way. I have always tried to love my Carmelite sisters equally and to the best of my ability. But even so, I didn't love them as God loves them. There is no artist who doesn't love to receive praise for their works. And Jesus, the artist of souls, is happy when we admire the beauty in each person, since he himself dwells within them. In my community, there is a sister who has a way of displeasing me in everything. Her words, her character, everything seems very disagreeable to me. And still, she is a holy religious who must be very pleasing to God. I did not want to give in to the natural antipathy that I was experiencing, and so I told myself that charity must not consist in feelings, but in works. Then I set myself to doing for this sister what I would do for the person I loved the most. Each time I met her, I prayed to God for her, offering him all her virtues and merits. I took care to render her all the services possible. And when I was tempted to answer her back in a disagreeable manner, I was content with giving her my most friendly smile and with changing the subject of the conversation. Frequently, when I had an occasion to work with this sister, I used to run away like a deserter whenever my struggles became too violent. One day at recreation, this sister said, "Would you tell me, Sister Therese of the Child Jesus, what attracts you so much towards me? Every time you look at me, I see you smile." What attracted me was Jesus hidden in the depths of her soul. When I was a novice, I used to help Sister St. Pierre walk to the refectory. She was suffering a lot from physical pain. Each evening, when I saw Sister St. Pierre shake her hourglass, I knew this meant it's time to go. Hold my hand. Now, watch that step in front of us. Oh, sister! You're going too fast. I'm going to fall and break something. I was right when I said you were too young to help me. When we finally reached the refectory, I tried to help her sit in a way that did not hurt her. And then I would turn back her sleeves in a particular way she wanted. I can't cut it. Let me help you, sister. You should have seen us working in the laundry room today. Sister Marie of St. Joseph always splashes me with dirty water every time she pulls the handkerchiefs out of the water. I've been working with her for about 7 months now. One of the tasks that I do is mending. None of the sisters wanted to work with Sister Marie of St. Joseph, and so I thought I would volunteer. Her mood tends to change a lot. One moment she can be cheerful, and in the next moment she can be plunged into misery. At times, she has violent outbursts of anger. Through talking to her, I learned that she lost her mother when she was small, like me. She does have a good singing voice, and so sometimes I encourage her to sing at recreation. Now that I spend time with her, I can see moments when she is fiercely battling against her temper. And I realize that she is a warrior. As you can see, I am a very little soul, and I can offer God only very little things. I don't always succeed in rising above the nothings of this earth. There have been many times when I have been tormented by something that I said or did that was foolish. When I enter into myself, I can see that I am still the same weak person that I used to be. But I acknowledge this with great gentleness and without any sadness. For I have learned that it is good to be weak and little. A few months ago, on Good Friday, I felt something like a bubbling stream coming up my throat, and I coughed up blood. This happened twice. I had been having sore throats and pains in my chest at times, but I was still able to carry out my duties. Lately, though, I have been feeling exhaustion take over me. Outside my window, I can see a dead leaf detached from the tree and suspended in the air by a light thread. That is how I feel. My life hangs only by a light thread. I think that I may not be alive for much longer. How easy it is to become discouraged when one is sick. It doesn't take much to lose patience or to lose one's reason if the suffering is severe. Without faith, one could easily think of taking one's own life. Around the same time that I coughed up blood, Jesus allowed me to experience a trial of faith, where he permitted my soul to be invaded by the thickest darkness. All my life, I have longed for heaven. I have always felt in the bottom of my heart that I was meant for something more than just my life here on earth. What attracts me about heaven is to be able to love and to be loved. It's what makes my heart beat. But for the past few months, I have felt no joy when I have thought of heaven. In fact, it is a torment. I feel as though the darkness that consumes me is mocking me, saying, "You are dreaming about the light. You are dreaming about the eternal possession of God the Creator. You think that one day you will walk out of this fog that surrounds you. But it is only a dream. There is no life beyond death. You may think you're covered in darkness now, but wait and see. Death will give you not what you hope for, but a night still more profound, the night of nothingness." I do not know when this trial will end, or when this darkness will go away. But I do know that God did not send me this trial until the moment that I was capable of bearing it. If I had experienced this a little earlier, I believe it would have plunged me into a state of discouragement. There are times when we feel that the trial that we are in is more than what we can bear. We feel as though we can't take it anymore. That is when I think of Jesus in Gethsemane. Before he suffered on the cross, his sweat became like drops of blood. And he too was distressed and agitated, and he said, "I am deeply grieved, even to death." When I think of Jesus trembling in the face of his suffering, I feel I am not alone. Do you hear that? Oh, that must be Sister Marie Philomen of Jesus. I think she's struggling with her faith too. A few days ago, my Sister Marie, who is now Sister Marie of the Sacred Heart, asked me to write about the secrets that Jesus confides to me. The truth is that he confides these secrets to her too. Nevertheless, I wrote her and said that Jesus had showed me the way of spiritual childhood, and that it's the way of confidence and total abandon. It is the surrender of a child who sleeps without fear in its father's arms. For Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me. Do not stop them. For it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs." And he took them up in his arms, laid his hands on them, and blessed them. I am a little child who has desires and longings which reach even unto infinity. My true vocation is to be a Carmelite, a spouse of Jesus and a mother of souls. But I also feel within me the vocation of the warrior, the priest, the apostle, the doctor, the martyr. I feel the need and the desire of carrying out the most heroic deeds. I even want to accomplish all the actions of the saints, and to proclaim the gospel to all the continents and remote isles. But how can I realize these desires of my soul? Is there a soul more little, more powerless than mine? In search for an answer, I looked to the letters of St. Paul to the Corinthians, where I read that the church is composed of different members, and that the eye cannot be the hand at one and the same time. The answer was clear, but it did not fulfill my desires and gave me no peace. I continued my reading, and I realized that St. Paul explains how all the most perfect gifts are nothing without love. That charity is the excellent way that leads most surely to God. I finally had rest. Charity gave me the key to my vocation. I understood that the church had a heart, and that this heart was burning with love. I understood that love comprised all vocations, that love was everything, that it embraced all times and spaces. In a word, that it was eternal. Oh, Jesus, my love, my vocation, at last I have found it. My vocation is love. I do not know if this all sounds delirious, but when we love, we experience the need of saying 1,000 foolish things. Fear makes me recoil, but love makes me fly. Marie, after you read these things that I wrote down for you, you said that a certain feeling of sadness came over you. You felt as though I loved Jesus more than you do, because I desire to do heroic things for Jesus, whereas you dread the suffering that comes along with that. I don't want you to be discouraged by this. The truth is that before Jesus suffered and died on the cross, he said, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." Uttering these words does not mean that Jesus did not love his Father. He loved his Father in such a way that, despite his grief, he said, "Your will be done." Whether we have great desires or not, what pleases Jesus is that he sees us loving our littleness and our poverty and having blind hope in his mercy. A year ago, I wrote my act of oblation to merciful love. In this oblation, I offered myself as a victim of Holocaust to God's merciful love. I wrote this because I wanted to love God better and to partake in Jesus' suffering on the cross. I asked you, Marie, at the time, if you would also like to offer yourself to God in this way. And you said, "Certainly not. I am not going to offer myself as a victim. God would take me at my word, and suffering frightens me too much. In the first place, this word victim displeases me very much." I understand why you would say that, Marie. But what I told you back then was that offering yourself to God's love does not mean that you would suffer more than you can endure. Rather, it would lead you to love God better and to be consumed by Him incessantly, allowing the waves of infinite tenderness within Him to overflow into your soul. Marie, I was truly happy when at last you did offer yourself to the merciful love of God. We were really blessed to have had a father who showed us God's mercy. On the day that I told Papa that I wanted to become a Carmelite nun, we both cried. Papa then went over and picked a little white flower, and he began to speak about the care with which God brought it into being and preserved it to this very day. I felt as though he was telling me the story of my soul. I cannot express in words what I felt that day. Therese, my little queen, look! The sun shines on this little flower as though it were all alone on earth. As you once said, God our Father loves each soul as though there were no others like it. My dear Therese, how I love you.
I'm Bob Colorisi. I'm the spiritual director of the society. And this is awesome. I got to tell you something. When I heard we were doing this, during the 30 years I've been here, I've had 3 or 4 requests of people doing a one-woman play. Well, I always get suspicious. I've been spent my career as a Carmelite trying to make her real. She's real and powerful, not that simpy, dropping petals from heaven, kind of an overactive and overly pious, which turned me off as a kid. When I first met her, I didn't like Therese. And so then I found out people were thinking that. They're going to pray and she's going to drop roses and all this stuff. But anyway, but the 3 or 4 that I saw, I said, I want to see the text or I want to see the video or the DVD. And they were all awful. So I didn't let it do it here. I wasn't going to sponsor it at the retreat house or at the shrine here or whatever. So when this first came, I heard about it, I said, are you sure? Because I come with a certain suspicion. But Mary, you here? You captured her incredibly well. Therese was a very real person, a dynamic person, an engaged person. She was engaged with life and reality. She wasn't, there's these pictures of her that look like she's out of it. She was not out of it, she was into it. But she struggled with it deeply because she was hypersensitive to life and hypersensitive to God's love affair and the intimacy of God in her life and her very person and her struggles. And most of it was through darkness. She highlighted the mother abandonment issues. And there were actually 3 of them in some ways. One was her biological mother, Zélie, and then Rose Taillé for 14 months. She loved Rose Taillé with her big breast, and you held her and everything. Her mom even writes she was much more comfortable with Rose Taillé because she was a big farm girl, instead of a more... her mother was a very disciplined lady in some ways. And then Pauline, the 3rd. So she went into this huge hissy fit over the whole thing. It was awful. And there's 9 months of hell that she was causing herself and everybody else. She got depressed. She was almost having, today we'd probably call a nervous breakdown. You know, when you get obsessed with something, a mother wound. And you know what's interesting is her, and I think you captured it. You know, that's what I love what you did out there, how live you made her, because she was very sensitive. We'd run away from it or try to deny it or whatever, fight it. But she was cured by the statue, or Mary Victorious. We'd call Lady of Grace. Okay. She saw it smile on Pentecost Sunday. Statues don't smile. But you know, the divine feminine had to save her, had to smile on her. And then nobody believed her. And even when she went to the convent to talk to Pauline and Marie and the nuns who had been heard her screaming for the last 9 months, acting out, which is why they never wanted her to join, this little spoiled brat who was having a hissy fit in public. The nuns asked her, you know, Pauline said, what happened? She smiled at me. Well, nobody believed her because she had been hallucinating for months. And finally, so Pauline, are you sure? Well, then one of the nuns very interestingly says to her, and it's a very interesting part of that story, but it's very real about the divine feminine, how you trust when God is intervening in our lives. And says to her, well, she must have had a blue sash. Mary always has a blue sash, as if she shows up in one costume all the time, you know. And she said, I don't know. All I know is she smiled at me. So the other nun says, well, did she have her gold shoes on? You know, Mary Lady of Lourdes had gold shoes. I don't know. All I know is she smiled at me. And she was transformed. And she believed it. She had to trust the experience. Mysticism is trusting the experiences of God that are real, even when you don't get the confirmation and affirmation you wanted. See, and that's huge. That's trusting something that you didn't get, wasn't there. And there's a lot of that. Her whole Christmas conversion that you think you highlighted, you know, how neat it was. Always it was darkness moment. In that end time, the last 18 months when she felt absence, you know, she saw her value in being seen. If you know the funny story, she didn't add that part, but I think it's really interesting. Her mom noticed that early on. She had to be seen. Her only value was she got it from outside. She was probably an extrovert in some ways. And, you know, seen, so remember, when she'd go upstairs and say your prayers and go to sleep, she'd go to the first step and say, Mama, Mama, because Mama was working on her ounce on lace. And if she didn't say, yes, Therese, she would just stay there. But then when she said, yes, Therese, she went to the next step and said, Mama, Mama. Yes, Therese. Mama, Mama. You know, here's a gal who wanted an elevator but had to climb stairs. And every entrance and exit needed to be noticed. That was an interesting thing. So suddenly when she goes into that incredible dark night, you know, she's very much a John of the Cross, not a Therese of Avila. We know that. You know, and that's why when you go to the museum over here, you'll see the windows of John of the Cross, his journey to the divine, to transparency. But anyway, and so I got lost there for a minute. But anyway, that she felt the absence. She wanted to be noticed. And suddenly, if you've all gone through dark times when you feel abandoned by God, like, where the hell have you gone? Why aren't you there? I've been through dark times, and you keep saying, where the hell did you go? I gave you my life. Where were you? You know, show up. And that was the hardest part. And of course, you know, the hardest thing there became, and I think she did a beautiful thing about understanding her vocation is love. All the things we do, she had a simplicity to her message, a real focus that it was love. But it was a search she had of all the dreams and hopes and expectations and sensitivities she had that somehow they were not being met, you know. But she realized love, and love was bigger than the feeling. She had really intense feelings about some of the nuns she lived with. There were some that should have been in a psychiatric ward. Because remember, they thought they were Jansenist. The more she suffered, the more God would love you. So the more miserable you were, God would love you. You know, she had to see through that. They thought she was naive. It's too simple. But then, you know, the last thing was that happened in her life, too, is when, you know, they didn't give Mass every day, but the chaplain gave communion 3 times a week. So when they came to give her communion, about the 3rd week, she was in the infirmary. After this dark, dark time, she vomited up the host. They called it consumption, remember? And the priest says, well, no more again. You know, we're always protecting Jesus from his people. And he never again. So the last sense she had that God was still reaching out to her This God who she longed for, this God she had felt intimate with, was gone. And it becomes the depths of darkness, not to be known, not to be seen, and not even to be looked for. Now, the little Therese, who was a spoiled brat, would usually have a hissy fit about that in one way or another. But she says, well, it's her greatest teaching at the end. She who's smiling on us here. As the sun goes down, it'll glisten more. And said, you know what? It's a grace to receive the sacrament because I know then you're with me. But it's also grace not to receive the sacrament because now my longing for you is even more because everything is grace. When you understand what Christ did in his life and death and resurrection, to transform the universe into an experience of holiness and enchantment and grace, that's what she came to. Everything is grace. Not some things that we think are. We love to divide the world into the holy, the unholy, the secular. Nothing. The transformation that she experiences, the transformation the universe experienced. And I think what she attracts, I think why she attracted people, I want to end here a little bit, but when I was interviewing people when we had the relic visit in '99, I'd say, what got her? What made you? And everybody said she made it human. She made it possible. She opened the doors of spirituality to us, that God loved us. And I think Mary caught that very, very well. So I really appreciate that. A couple of just quick announcements here, but thank you for coming. We're glad you came here and the Carmelites made it. She is our star. I didn't like her until I got the job, and Quinn is back there as our provincial. We arm wrestled for 3 days, and at the end I said, I don't even like her. And he said, well, learn to. And she's changed my life through the dark times, how to get through the darkness in life. Anyway, here at the National Shrine, we will be having the celebration of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, the Feast of the Carmelites here. Should we call her more our sister in faith and our mother and queen? But she's very much our sister in faith. So we're going to have it on the 17th because the feast is on the Sunday. So if you want to come back, we'll have a celebration. You'll see signs here. We're also bringing over the relics that we had in '99 from September 17th to October 1st. Her relics and the relics of her parents. Now we're spreading it out because if some of you were here in '99 when the Châtelet police tried to shut us down, in 2.5 days we had 50 people on this campus and they backed up in 55. So we're taking it for a whole 2 weeks so you can have quiet time with her and spend time with the presence of our sister in faith here who somehow can really touch our souls about the simplicity of love, the simplicity of this journey to God, the incredible intimacy that God has of us, the God who is always and already present. And I think Mary captured that whole thing nearly. She looked in all the tragedies and joys and disappointments and hurts and darkness of her life. She somehow had a faith that carried her through it. I believe you're here. I know you're hiding. Would you show up once in a while? And when he didn't, she still loved him. Could say at the end, I love you. So thank you for coming. Follow her spirituality. There are going to be some snacks outside here, I believe. If you could make a free will donation to help defray the cost of bringing her in. Thank you for coming.